This is not just war. This is theater. And someone out there is still buying the tickets. In the Sahel, the enemy changed. Not because they got smarter, but because they got scared. Gone are the suicide drones and mines in the dust. Now, they send inflatable trucks. Wrapped in plastic. Parked like ghosts. Not to win the war, but to look like they're still fighting one. These fake armies don't advance. They don't shoot. They just exist, on camera. Because war, now, is not about force. It's about optics. Funding. Manipulation. But Mali saw through it. The FAMa didn't just fire missiles. They fired truth. And if you believe Africa has the right to real sovereignty, not staged terror shows, stay with us. This isn't just a story. This is a reckoning. In Burkina Faso, over 50 soldiers were killed in a sudden base ambush. A reminder that the Sahel is now the epicenter of global terror. From the forests of Gomo to the sands of Kidal, armed groups evolve with every drone strike, every failed mission, every ghost truck. On July 27, FAMa detected and destroyed enemy convoys near Kidal. But they found only air. Inflated decoys. Phantom wars. This isn't just about bullets. It's about power. Who owns the land, the truth, and the story? And this is where it begins. The war in the Sahel did not disappear. It mutated. There was a time, not long ago, when the enemy ruled with death. IEDs buried like vipers in the sand. Suicide drones screaming down like the horsemen of the apocalypse. Civilians massacred in their sleep. Soldiers ambushed on supply roads that never led home. That was the war they knew. And it almost worked. But Mali adapted. FAMa didn't just fight harder. They fought wiser. They began reading patterns, spotting trails not left by boots but by behaviors. And suddenly, the jungle grew quiet. The roads were empty. The air was still. Until the drones showed something strange. Convoys. Dozens of vehicles. All parked. But no heat. No signals. No life. From above, it looked like a full-blown operation. But on the ground, there was only plastic. Plastic molded into trucks, shaped into tanks. Ghost armies. Why? Because the enemy no longer believes in bullets. They believe in optics. And when the battlefield moves to the screen, the real weapon is illusion. These are not battles. They are performances. A truck doesn't need to move. It just needs to be seen. A target doesn't need to exist. It just needs to be painted. A war doesn't need to be fought. It just needs to be funded. Because for many of these groups, especially JNIM, this isn't jihad. This is theater for sponsors. A video here. A drone shot there. Show the money is being used. Show that the cause is alive. Even if the soldiers are not. In Gomo, they tried the same trick. A camera crew arrived before the fighters. They filmed themselves attacking an empty outpost. Shooting at walls. Shouting, Allahu Akbar, into nothing. They posted the video online. And somewhere in Europe, a bank account filled. This is the new warfare. 1 part violence. 3 parts cinema. But Mali saw through it. They knew these weren't warriors. They were actors. They weren't storming bases. They were staging them. FAMa changed strategy. Instead of dropping bombs by the dozen, they waited. Tracked. Verified. And when the time came, they struck once. Clean. Precise. A real vehicle was found near Kidal. Inside, real terrorists. Real supplies. Real intentions. That was the difference. Between war as show and war as reality. The illusion cracked. And across the Sahel, you could hear a silence louder than any bomb. Because it wasn't just the targets that vanished. It was belief. When you're sending ghost trucks into battle, You've already lost the war. But who benefits from this illusion? Why keep a war alive with plastic and film? The answer lies not in Mali, but in Paris, in Brussels, in the boardrooms of oil companies, and the chambers of old empires. As long as the war looks real, funding continues. Contracts are extended. CFA francs are printed. The same currency that pays the fighters. And the same one minted in France. Every fake battle video is a ledger. Every ghost truck is an invoice. But Mali did more than expose it. They countered it. Because the true power of sovereignty is not in denying lies, but in refusing to need them. FAMa doesn't need to appear strong. They became strong. And that, more than any missile, more than any tank, terrifies the architects of the ghost war. There's a moment in every war when strength stops being about how much force you unleash and starts being about how precisely you use it. For Mali, that moment came when they stopped chasing shadows. At first, it was frustrating. Hours of drone surveillance, decoys everywhere. Every convoy was a coin toss, real or rubber. But something shifted. Instead of reacting, FAMa began to pattern. They noticed which vehicles never refueled, which camps had no waste, which heat signatures blinked on and off like a looped GIF. And then came the new doctrine. Frappe or just. Strike right. One missile. 1 hour of intel. One confirmed target. That's how you reclaim a war. From the hands of fiction. It was more than a tactic. It was philosophy. Discipline over panic. Analysis over impulse. And it started to work. In early July, an entire column of fake vehicles was left untouched. No bombs wasted. No headlines gifted. No victory photos taken by the enemy to flash across social media. Instead, 48 hours later, a real truck carrying ammonium nitrate, RPGs, and satellite phones was tracked leaving the forest near Tessalit. 3 hours later. Obliterated. Real loss. Real consequences. That's what changed the momentum. Because propaganda can survive silence. But it cannot survive truth. And truth has blast radius too. When the enemy realized their cinema was no longer being watched, they grew reckless. They abandoned subtlety. They returned to brutality. In Gomo, they stormed a civilian village, burned homes, took hostages, left bodies on the road, and tried to film it as a military success. But Mali saw the pattern. They deployed rapid intervention units. Not for footage, but for protection. They didn't bring cameramen. They brought medics. They didn't record for the internet. They recorded for the courts. And in that moment, something shifted in the Sahel. The population, once skeptical, began to whisper. FAMa is changing. Because for decades, armies in Africa were seen as reactive, as firepower with no foresight, as forces chasing ghosts, never understanding them. But here was a force that didn't just strike. It selected, calculated, waited, and then struck with reason. That scares the world far more than raw might. Because control is what makes empire nervous. Not just resistance, but smart resistance. Suddenly, those who funded the Ghost War started losing confidence. Because Mali wasn't collapsing. It was calibrating. And when the illusion faded, so did the appetite for help. The phone calls from certain embassies stopped. The drone intelligence dried up. NGOs began to reassess operations. Because if Mali didn't need chaos, they didn't need handlers either. That's what sovereignty looks like. Not isolation, but independence. Not silence, but selective voice. Captain Traoré knew this. And while the world was fixated on the battlefield, he turned his attention to the toolbox. Not just guns, but radio interceptors. Not just troops, but digital analysts. Not just soldiers, but minds. Mali started investing in homegrown surveillance. Not to mimic the West, but to surpass it where it mattered. They didn't build billion-dollar satellites. They trained young Sahelians to decode chatter, to understand linguistic patterns in local dialects, to spot when a video was doctored. Not with AI, but with logic. This wasn't just tactical superiority. This was psychological liberation. The kind that terrifies both insurgents and their financiers. Because what do? When your enemy stops being afraid of shadows, you either escalate or disappear. And lately, they've been disappearing. The ghost trucks haven't returned. The anonymous videos have dropped in quality. Even the disinformation campaigns online, the ones built to shake public trust, have grown sloppy. Why? Because fear is hard to fake when no one's watching. FAMa had won something more important than a battle. They had won the frame. The frame through which Mali is seen. By its people. By its soldiers. And by the world. Not as a victim, but as a filter breaker. And if you're watching this and wondering, what's the lesson here? It's simple. Sovereignty isn't won in one war. It's won in thousands of small decisions. One drone flight. One refusal to panic. One silence in place of a headline. One truth in place of a lie. And if that means fewer viral clips, fewer foreign reports, fewer hashtags, so be it. Because the only thing that matters in a war built on illusion is who still sees clearly when the smoke fades. If you're still with us, drop a comment. Not for us, but for every voice in Africa, choosing precision over panic. This isn't just military discipline. It's cultural defiance. And it's just beginning. The trucks were fake. The battles were staged. But the money? Oh, the money was real. And it flowed. Not from caves or black markets, but from bank accounts in Europe. To understand the ghost war, you must understand its fuel, currency and control. Let's start with the CFA franc. A currency used in 14 African countries. Printed in France. Controlled by France. Stored in the French treasury. And, according to multiple credible sources, used to pay terrorists in the Sahel. Yes. The same bills used to buy bread in Ouagadougou are the ones funding chaos in Kidal. Why? Because colonialism never left. It just changed clothes. It took off the uniform and put on a suit. Traded rifles for balance sheets. Traded empires for economic zones. But the logic stayed the same. Control the money. Control the people. Control the chaos. Control the narrative. So how do you justify keeping control? You keep the region unstable. A war that never ends. Justifies foreign presence. Justifies military bases. Justifies aid packages. Justifies keeping the CFA franc circulating in flames. And what happens when a country breaks that chain? You get Burkina Faso. You get Mali. You get Niger. You get the AES. The Alliance of Sahel States. The first bloc in modern African history to openly reject the colonial financial system. To nationalize foreign mining firms. To say no to foreign military presence. And yes to African sovereignty. And the moment they did that, the attacks multiplied. Coincidence? No. It's economics. Take Bargold, a mining company with Belgian ties, operating in gold-rich zones in Burkina Faso. After it was nationalized, Belgium suspended diplomatic ties. Not protested. Not negotiated. Suspended. Then came the attacks. Gomo. Traoré. Tinzawatan. Every time a mine was reclaimed, a barrack was bombed. Every time a French contract was torn, a drone strike was reported. Every time CFA francs were rejected, videos of chaos surfaced. But here's the twist. Some of these attacks weren't even real. According to security analysts, there are two types of JNIM videos. 1. The real attacks. Brutal. Bloody. Civilians and soldiers killed, filmed, and broadcasted. Designed to terrify. 2. The caricature attacks, where fighters shoot into empty spaces. Stage ambushes like movie scenes. Add chanting. Add smoke. Post on social media. Why? To prove activity to their funders. To show they're earning their payments. To maintain the illusion of relevance. Because when the AES rejected France's currency, they didn't just threaten economics. They threatened the industry of terrorism. A system where chaos is a business model. Where NGOs become front-end PR. Where drone footage is a product. Where death tolls are just statistics on a quarterly report. And Mali refused to play along. FAMa began verifying every report. No more knee-jerk press releases. They checked bodies. Checked ballistics. Checked metadata. In one case, a report said, 50 soldiers dead in Joe. FAMa responded. No bodies. No uniforms. No blood. Just pictures of guns, staged like a museum. And the page that posted it. Anonymous. Verified with a gold check mark. Thousands of followers. Zero presence on the ground. That's how propaganda works. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It weaves doubt. It erodes morale. And it's funded. Just like the ghost trucks. By the same networks. With the same currency. The war isn't just on the ground. It's in perception. It's in what you believe. And more importantly, who you believe. And in that fog, the AES made a radical choice. They chose trust. Not in France. Not in the UN. But in themselves. They started building parallel institutions. Media. Defense. Finance. They created an alternative to the CFA franc. They pushed for regional gold reserves. They replaced military advisors with African strategists. It was messy. It was slow. But it was theirs. And for the first time, France could not predict their next move. The Ghost War depended on reaction. But now, there was no reaction. No panic. No begging. Just silence. And sovereignty. That's when the disinformation intensified. Western outlets flooded with stories. Coup in Niger. Instability in Burkina. Sahel crumbling. But on the ground, roads were being built. Railways planned. Universities opened. Not perfect. But not collapsing. Because sovereignty is noisy. And freedom is never polished. But it's real. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when Africa stops asking permission, the empire loses its leverage. And when the AES chose truth over theatrics, they didn't just break the Ghost War. They rewrote the script. So the next time you hear about a failed state, or a jihadist takeover, or a crisis in the Sahel, ask this. Who's filming the footage? Who's funding the fear? And who stands to lose? When Africans start thinking for themselves. If you made it this far, drop the word clarity in the comments. Because in a war built on confusion, clarity is resistance. And the Sahel, it just might be the clearest place on earth right now. The Ghost War was a lie. But it wasn't the terrorists who invented it. They copied it. Because the blueprint for illusion warfare was written elsewhere. Long before Mali ever saw a drone. In Fallujah. In Kandahar. In Raqqa. It was the West that first turned war into theater. Remember, weapons of mass destruction. Remember the raids that found nothing. The drone strikes that hit weddings. The staged kills for domestic applause. Ghost wars didn't start in the Sahel. They were perfected in the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. Fake intel. False flags. Mission accomplished on carriers, while the mission crumbled on the ground. So when JNIM stages a video, they're not innovating. They're imitating. They're playing from a script written in Washington and Paris, where narrative is everything and facts are optional. The tragedy. Africa became the next stage, the next sandbox for experiments in deception. And when AES refused to play along, refused the script, refused the costumes, refused the lines, the directors panicked. Because you can only sell a war when someone agrees to star in it. And the Sahel said, no more. No more funding fiction. No more dying for optics. No more bowing to invisible enemies. Invented for contracts. This is the twist. The Ghost War isn't just a tactic. It's a legacy. A colonial legacy. Of perception control. It's how you occupy a land without touching the soil. How you delegitimize governments without sending an army. How you convince the world that sovereignty is instability and dependency is peace. But Mali flipped the frame. FAMa didn't just defeat decoys. They defeated the doctrine that gave them power. They turned the drone's eye back on its maker. And what they saw was the origin of the ghost. Not in a camp in Kidal, but in a boardroom in Brussels, a war room in Virginia, a studio in Paris. That's the twist. The enemy wasn't always in the footage. Sometimes they were behind the camera. The Ghost War is not over, but it has been unmasked. And that is the first victory. Because when you expose a lie, you don't just defeat it. You disarm it. You make it small. You make it desperate. That is what FAMa did. What Mali chose. What the Sahel declared. That sovereignty is not about silence. It's about sight. It's not about might. It's about meaning. Africa is not confused. It is clear. It is awake. It is building. And if this story moved you, like, comment, subscribe. Not for views, but for vision. Not for noise, but for clarity. Because the next war will not be fought with bombs. It will be fought with truth. And we've already chosen our side.